A tropical river. Our padrone, as Talbot told us we should call him, stood in front, clad in a colored muslin shirt. The broad sluggish river was alive with boats, all making their way against the current. By the time the lagoon had narrowed, however, they had pretty well scattered. We entered a tropical forest, and never shall I forget the wonder of it. The banks were lined to the water's edge with vegetation, so that one could see nothing but the jungle. There were great palm trees, which we recognized, and teak trees, which we did not, but which Talbot identified for us. It was a very bald sort of tree, as I remember it. Then there were tremendous sycamores, in which were ants' nests as big as beehives, and banana trees with torn leaves, probably the most exotic touch of all, and beautiful noble mangoes, like domes of a green cathedral, and various sorts of canes and shrubs and lilies growing among them. And everywhere leaped and swung the vines, thick ropey vines, knotted vines, like knotted cables, slender filament vines, spraying gossamer vines, with gorgeous crimson, purple, and yellow blooms, and long streamers that dipped to trail in the waters. Below them were broad paths of lotus and water lilies, with alligators like barnacled logs, and cormorants swimming about, and bright-eyed waterfowl. The shadows in the forests were light, clear green, and the shadows under the hanging jungle near the water were dull green. And the very upper air itself, in that hot, steaming glade, seemed delicately green too. Butterflies were among the vine blossoms, so brilliant of color that it seemed to me that the flowers were fluttering from their stems. Across the translucent green shadows flashed birds. I recognized little green parakeets. I had never before seen them outside of cages. No man can realize the wonder of finding himself actually part of romantic scenes so long familiar in the pages of books, that they have become almost mythical. We sat there absolutely silent, save when calling attention to some new marvel, drinking it in. Our men paddled steadily ahead. The Negro hummed strange minor songs to himself. Suddenly, he flashed his teeth at us and broke into full voice, "Oh, Susanna, don't cry for me. I'm off to California with my banjo on my knee." The accent was queer, but the words and tune were right. Talbot questioned him in Spanish. "He says all Americans sing it. He has taken many up the river." "Too many," muttered Johnny. "I wish we'd started 3 months sooner." It was growing dusk when we came in sight of a village of bamboo huts on the right bank. To this we headed. Hardly had the boat struck the beach when both of our men leaped ashore and raced madly toward the huts, pausing only long enough to slide the boat beyond the grip of the river. We followed, considerably mystified. Quick as we were, we found both the padrone and his man, together with a dozen others, already seated at a monte table. The padrone was acting as banker. We discovered the name of this place to be Gatun. Talbot found us a native hut in which were hammocks we could rent for the night. The hut was a 2-storied affair with a notched pole by which to clamber aloft. I took one look and decided to stay below. My weight seemed sufficient to bring the whole thing down about our ears. I do not know which had the better of it. My hammock was slung across one corner of the single room. A cooking fire blazed merrily 5 or 6 feet away. Some 10 or a dozen natives were drinking and talking until nearly morning. And to my personal knowledge, some 10 or a dozen thousand fleas were doing the same. 6 dogs were that hut's allowance. They discovered that my weight sagged my hammock down to a height just suitable for the rubbing of their backs. In vain I smote with boot or pistol barrel. They keyed and departed, but only for a moment. I had not even time to fall into a doze before one of the others was back at it. This amused the drinking natives. I suppose the poor beasts very passionately wanted to scratch their backs. I could sympathize with them. None of them could have had as many fleas as I had, for their superficial area was not as great, but perhaps they had as many per square inch. In the course of the night it began to rain. I mean really rain, without going into details as to drops, as somebody has said. Then I ceased envying my friends upstairs, for from all sounds I judged the roof was leaking. Next morning it was still drizzling. The town was full of sad-eyed, wearied men. I think every one had had about the same experience. The padrone was at first a little inclined to delay, but he quickly recognized that our mood was bad, so shortly we were underway. The day was not an unmitigated joy. It rained, picking the surface of the river up in little spots and rings. The forest dripped steadily. All the butterflies and bright birds had disappeared, and sullen, shifting clouds fairly touched the treetops. It was cold. Wrap ourselves as we would, we became thoroughly chilled. We should have liked to go ashore for a little fire, or at least a tramp about, but there seemed to be no banks, and the vegetation would not let us approach whatever earth there might be. The padrone and the big Negro thrust their heads through holes cut in the middle of their blankets, and seemed happy. Talbot Ward and Yank took it with the philosophy of old campaigners, but Johnny and I had not had experience enough to realize that things have a habit of coming to an end. We were too wet even to smoke. That night we spent at a place called Peña Blanca, which differed in no essential from Gatun. We slept there in small sheds, along with 20 or 30 of our ship's companions wedged tightly together. A dozen other similar sheds adjoined. We were all quarrelsome and disinclined to take much nonsense either from the natives or from each other. Also, we needed and wanted food, and we had difficulty in getting it. A dozen incipient quarrels were extinguished because the majority of the crowd would not stand for being bothered by the row. Finally, the whole hutful became involved, and it really looked for a moment like a riot. A good deal of bad language flew about, and men seized their weapons. Yank rose to the occasion by appealing to them not to kick up a muss because there was a lady of our own color in the next room. The lady was mythical, but the riot was averted. The next day was clearing, with occasional heavy dashing showers just to keep us interested. The country began more to open up. We passed many grass savannas dotted with palms and a tree something like our locust. Herds of cattle fed there. The river narrowed and became swifter. Often our men had to lay aside their paddles in favor of the pole or tracking line. Once or twice we landed and walked for a short distance along the banks. At one place we saw several wild turkeys. At another, something horrifying, rustling, and reptilian made a dash fairly from between my feet and rushed flop into the water. The boys claimed I jumped straight upward 4 feet, but I think it was nearer 10. Talbot said the thing was an iguana. I should very much like to be able to describe it accurately, but my observation was somewhat confused. Beyond the evident fact that it snorted actual fire, I am not prepared to go. Along in the early afternoon, we reached Boulder Shores, in which the trap rock descended sheer beneath the surface of the water. Directly ahead of us rose a mountain like a cone of verdure. We glided around the base of it, and so came to Gorgona, situated on a high bluff beyond. This we had decided upon as the end of our river journey. To be sure, we had bargained for Cruces, 6 miles beyond, but as the majority of our ship's companions had decided on that route, we thought the Gorgona trail might be less crowded. So we beached our boat and unloaded our effects and set forth to find accommodations for the present and mules for the immediate future.